Want to introduce our speakers today and our skilled moderator, and then I'm going to go into a little bit of an introduction today about who we are at Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. Today we will be moderated by Anthony Van Whitson, Tony Van Whitson, and he will lead the discussion between Professor Ian Adams, Burke Farah, and Avni Chadha, the speakers that you see here on my screen right now. And I'll let Tony introduce each of our distinguished speakers in a moment. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally. ESAL is a national nonpartisan 501c3 dedicated to increasing local civic engagement by people with backgrounds in STEM, or science, technology, engineering, mathematics. We were spurred to do this by our founder's local policy experience in her community and identifying a number of gaps in scientists and engineers getting involved in civic life. So we aim to help scientists and engineers get involved by with three pillars. First, giving opportunities to learn about local STEM topics and organizations, such as our event today about AI and policing. Our second pillar is giving people the opportunity to meet others through virtual events like this, workshops and conference sessions, networking events, and an online community, which I'll talk about in a moment. The third pillar that we have is supporting people to take action using tools and resources. We have a number of playbooks and materials online that you can engage with to use these tools to engage locally. And so we distribute our impact through three different ways. Single one-time actions where our volunteers or folks who use our materials deliver public comments, volunteer for local events, write an op-ed, or attend lobby days. We also help people campaign for ballot initiatives, input on state or local budgets, or advocate for policy during a legislative session. We also have folks who have experience serving on boards or commissions, working for local government, or even running for office, and volunteering or working for local nonprofits. And we love to hear from people's experiences and sharing their work in any of these three areas. So we invite everyone here who's online today who hasn't engaged with us before. We welcome you. We also invite you to join us. We have an online community where you can connect, learn, and contribute to different policy issues in your local area. We have a lot of climate action interest. We have other local policy engagement issues, like as small as, more bike lanes in your local community, for example. So there's a variety of issues that people can engage with and learn from each other on. And we invite you to sign up for our community here at the bottom, onlinecommunity.esal.us. We also have a couple of events where you can join us and learn a little bit more about what we do or get connected with others across the country who are also interested in getting involved in their local communities. And so that's a little bit about us. And I see we have a lot of people who joined us today, so welcome everyone. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. I see mostly everyone is off video, but if you would like to get on video while you ask a question, we invite you to do that. We also invite you to please put your questions in the chat during the webinar while we get the discussion going between our speakers, and we will monitor that and pose the questions as the webinar goes on. So with that, I'll hand it over to Tony, who's going to be moderating our discussion today.
Thank you very much, Jessica. I'm going to start with a question. If you were accused of a crime, or if you even had a simple encounter with the police, would you trust a computer program to give other people an accurate account of what happened? As recently as 2 or 3 years ago, that would have been science fiction. But now, just in the last year or so, police departments around the whole country have begun using commercially available AI models to produce the kind of reports that police officers are required to write to document every encounter between citizens and law enforcement. These reports have always been a standard feature of criminal investigations. They're the fundamental documents used to determine whether to file charges and how to build a case for the prosecution as well as for the defense. An accurate report can speed the process of finding justice, while an inaccurate or biased report could change the scope or the severity or even the basis of a criminal case. Today, we'll learn how these programs, such as Draft One and TrueLeo, work and inquire whether they help police do their jobs or whether they raise questions about lack of transparency and potential biases in the training data that might introduce new challenges into the justice system. If questions come up during the discussion that you would like to ask, please put them in the chat, and we will definitely include some time at the end to take as many questions as we possibly can. We have three distinguished guests with us this afternoon to help discuss this critical topic. Ian Adams is professor of criminology and criminal justice at the University of South Carolina and an expert in police procedure and also police use of technology. Burke Farah is deputy chief of the Fresno, California Police Department, which was an early adopter of Draft One. Avneet Chattah is deputy public defender of the in Los Angeles County, California. So I'd like to start with Chief Farah. I don't know if you have a presentation or not, or would you rather I just ask you some questions about Draft One?
Go right ahead, so you can ask me the question. I'd just like to start off by making sure people understand that we have not abdicated the role of writing a police report over to a computer or to AI. Our officers are engaged at every step of the process. And I can explain that process and kind of help people understand how it works. Maybe
yes, please tell us.
So the way Draft One works, that's the product we're using here at the Fresno Police Department, is Draft One accesses the body-worn camera footage from the contact the officer has on a specific call. And it transcribes that conversation and everything that's heard on that body camera into the computer. And then the AI analyzes that dialogue and creates the first draft or Draft One of a proposed police report. At that point, our officers have to step in and review that document as a starting base and fine tune it, correct it, amplify certain things, delete things that are irrelevant to the investigation, and then submit that police report to a supervisor who then reviews the product as well and makes sure that it's an accurate representation of that officer's investigation. When I sign my name at the bottom of that report, I'm taking responsibility for that investigation. And I think a parallel here, technology-wise, is when digital cameras first came on the scene. There's a lot of concern that digital images could be manipulated, misrepresented, changed, adjusted. And I understand it's still a concern today. But the standard in court, and perhaps Mr. Chattah could speak to this, is we hold the picture up to the officer. We say, does this picture accurately represent what you saw at the scene that night? If the answer is yes, then it's admissible into evidence. The report's the same thing. Does this police report, Officer Farah, accurately represent the investigation that you did? Is it truthful to the best of your ability? Is this what happened that night? And the answer is yes, then we move forward at that point. I also like to point out that I don't think there's any industry outside of criminal justice that has more checks and balances in this process than ours. We have our police officer that has to review it, a supervisor that has to review it, a detective that's recommending filing on charges to review it, a district attorney intake program that has to review that report as well. And then the ultimate check and balance is the public defender that takes a look at that information. More importantly, to backstop all of this is the actual body camera footage itself, which is the truth record of exactly what happened. So there's a lot of checks and balances in this process. There's a lot of guardrails that make sure that we stay on the straight and narrow and we deliver the best product possible. So that's kind of how it works, if that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Let me ask you, do you use Draft One for any kind of police encounter, including criminal encounters?
We do not use Draft One for everything at this point. We are phasing it in and training our people. We've been at this for almost 2 years. We started with our lowest level reports, minor misdemeanor crimes, and what we call a general incident report. Things that don't rise to a level of crime, but need to be documented in a police report anyway. That's where we started. And we've used Draft One over 17,000 times as of the third quarter of 2025. And we're happy with how it's going. We've still got some work to do, but we're very pleased with the results so far.
How have you found it in terms of productivity? Has it actually helped officers in terms of their ability to, I mean, it's not a secret that police do not like writing reports. That's widespread. They'd rather be out on the street. Has this helped them?
Sure. And I think there's two answers to that. We look at the data. We collect data on thousands of police reports in this process. And our officers estimate they expended, on average, 23 minutes they've saved of time as to what the report would have taken them. We also check for quality. And on a scale of 1 to 5, these reports rated about a 4.3 on that scale, which is maybe as good or maybe even better than standard officer drafts. But I talked to some of my very experienced cops, guys that I came on the job with 35 years ago. And what they've said is that because of the transcription of the body camera, the level of detail is much better than their own memory. So they're like, oh, I kind of forgot about that small part, but the witness mentioned that. It's in the draft. Let me amplify that part and make sure it gets into the report. And the other thing they're finding is as they narrate into their body camera, they can almost transcribe their own report while they're on body camera. So simple things like, my name is Burke Farah and I'm working 3 Baker 22 is my unit today. I'm assigned to uniform patrol. I'm driving a marked black and white vehicle. All that stuff can be audibly stated by the officer, and then it transcribes and moves into the report and saves them a whole bunch of time in typing that stuff out every day.
Thank you very much. We'll move on now to Professor Ian Adams. Could you tell us a little bit about the research you've been doing on use of artificial intelligence in police reporting? What did you want to investigate? What questions did you want to ask? And what did you find?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was good to hear from Chief Farah there. His comments reflect a lot of what I hear across the United States. So a lot of my research work is, or if not all of it, is aimed directly at working with agencies in bringing science into those processes, what we call evidence-based policing. And so I was contacted early in 2024, prior to the official launch of Draft One, and it was an agency who I have a relationship with, and they were looking at piloting what we call Draft One now, and asked if I would be willing to evaluate it. And specifically, they were specifically interested in time savings, right? The marketing around Draft One has been heavily focused on efficiency claims. In fact, Axon was claiming, at the time at least, that it would save officers 82% of time. And I took a look at that number, and I'm a curious, skeptical sort. Like, why 82%? Why not 85? Why not 90? Why not 100? And so in talking with Axon, I learned that was a self-report. Like Chief Farah just said, his officers are reporting they're gaining about 23 minutes per report. And that's what Axon was going off of as well. And any social scientist knows self-reports are to be squinted at. And if I ask 100 people how much sleep they got last night, none of them are going to be correct, right? We can go look at their sleep records and figure that out. So I agreed to help out this agency. It's Manchester, New Hampshire. We set up a pure RCT, a randomized controlled field trial, in which half of their patrol officers had access to Draft One, half were assigned to business as usual. We ran it for 6 weeks, and we're able to get into the auditing files in the background of their report management system to see exactly how long it took them from the point they hit create report to the point they hit submit report. So that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about sort of what comes after that. Like the chief mentioned, there's robust reporting procedures that come after that. And our only goal at that moment was to understand, is it true that AI report writing saves officers time? And so the results of that initial study number one, were no. In fact, it was a clean null for the scientists in the room, meaning there was no difference in the mean or the average time it was taking officers to write a report in Draft One versus business as usual. But then something funny happened on the way to the farm when we ran study two. In study two, we went back to those same officers and we asked them, amongst other things, we asked them and their supervisors. One of the questions we asked them was, is this tool saving you time, right? Because the agency was trying to make a decision about whether to keep going with the technology at that point. And interestingly, half of the officers in our treatment group, these are officers who would have been using the technology, half of them said, yes, this is saving me a tremendous amount of time. So one takeaway that I like to leave with audiences is that you should expect a fairly large perception to data gap when it comes to AI tools. We have this weird thing about us as human beings that if somebody hands us a magic pencil and says, this is a magic pencil and it does magic things, Some of us will just believe that what happens after that is magical. And it can seem magical. I really like this technology. I hope that I'm not construed as anything but a technology optimist. I think there's a lot of value here. But we should be careful around the efficiency claims. Policing is not an efficient game. It never has been. And it's not our ultimate. I'm a former police officer, so when I say our, I mean I still include myself in that profession. We're not efficient as a profession, as that's not our highest goal. Our highest goal is sanctity of life, preservation of law and order, community safety, civil rights. And we swear an oath to the Constitution, not to the bottom line. And so it isn't necessarily a death knell for the technology to say it isn't accomplishing its efficiency goals, but it is a moment to pause and say, well, if it's not accomplishing that, then what might it be? What value add is it bringing into the profession?
Thank you very much. We'll move. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask you, but I'd like to give Avneet Chatah a chance to talk as well.
Of course.
Avneet, why are police reports important to you as a public defender? And what do you look for in police reports?
I'm muted, my apologies. Professor Adams and Chief Farah hit it on the nail and saying, especially Chief Farah, I mean, he knows the system, right? Police reports are that critical piece of evidence that I'm generalizing here, but 95% of charges are filed based off just what the police report says, right? In more complex cases, the district attorney's office may consult the local law enforcement agency in terms of what's body worn video say, what's other additional evidence say. But the vast majority of crimes are just based off the initial police report because, believe it or not, that's usually sufficient to determine did something happen. And that's just the initial inquiry, right? And so that's why it gives us pretty much a good summary of what's actually going on. And it can give us key bits information. And then we step to the body worn video and additional digital evidence in terms of determining, well, does this all match up? Was something left out? Why was it left out? Is it critical? Is it not critical? And that frames us as defense attorneys to be able to ask those questions, especially in felony cases where we get the preliminary hearing. Why wasn't this included? Like I've asked that hundreds of times, officers, why didn't you include this bit of information that was on a body worn video, but not in your police report? And Chief Farah said it, like sometimes the officers, they didn't think about it. They're working a double, they're working, or they're late in their shift. And honestly speaking, officers can be tired. I've had an officer say, I was working a double, I was just tired, that's why I wasn't included. And that is, in my opinion, a very honest response. And it goes a lot of ways to earn credibility. So that's why it's so fundamental, because it helps us evaluate a case, especially as public defenders and criminal attorneys in general. We have high volumes. And so the police report really can streamline what is happening. Does this match up with the charges? What is my client looking at? Do they have a defense? Are the questions that we're asking? And so I forgot the second question, but that's generally what we're thinking and why it's so important for the initial police report.
Well, my second question really concerned to what extent are you concerned about the use of artificial intelligence in writing police reports, particularly if there are safeguards in them? And as you know, the state of California just began a law on January 1st requiring that all police reports written with the aid of artificial intelligence, that fact has to be disclosed to all parties involved. Exactly what's got you concerned?
Yeah, it's a lot of things. Professor, I skimmed over some of his research this morning. I think he talks a little bit about it, but the problem is fundamentally with AI. It's not necessarily with law enforcement. It's that we don't know enough about AI and how it comes to its conclusions, and AI is essentially a black box. Even the people that are designing the AI, engineers and coders, don't really understand how it came to its conclusions. Is one problem. Furthermore, it's when we put it in use, the problem with law enforcement, I'm not trying to single out Chief Farah, but he's here. And I mean, he would, I believe he would concede law enforcement doesn't necessarily always want to give away all their tools, right? They have reasons for why they want to keep some tools in-house. At least in my experience with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, when we've tried to inquire on certain tools that were used during preliminary hearings or 1530s, which are suppression motions and other things, they don't necessarily want to disclose that information. They don't want to disclose that they're using Palantir and Palantir's AI, and how Palantir's AI came to its conclusion that our client is a suspect. And so when we have issues with lack of transparency, it can cause great concern. I think if there's a baseline rule or a ceiling as to what that transparency must look like and must be disclosed, it is a totally different story, right? But when we don't have that, it causes a great concern as to how am I going to tackle this case. And I have one quote that I just want to read that came about in a case that I was handling, and I wrote it down. Let me stop 1 second. The officer wrote, my immediate reaction was an autonomic somatic response to a violent action by the inmate as associated by dissociative amnesia. And I'm not sitting here saying I'm a genius. By no means am I the most educated person on this call. I know some of y'all are professors, and we also have Professor Adams here. I don't know what the hell that means.
Can we?
And I highly doubt an officer knows what that means as well.
Yeah.
I would bet good money that I highly doubt what an officer means. So when my colleague showed me this line, I asked him a few questions. I said, "What year was this written?" And because he came to me, he's like, "I think they're using AI," and I happen to coincidentally become this AI person that my office talks to all the time because I just love researching the technology. I asked what year it was drafted, and I then did some research. And CDCR and some agencies in California started using AI a couple of years ago. That correlates with about ChatGPT 3 and ChatGPT 3.5 and 4. And it makes sense. During that time, it was coming up with these crazy hallucinatory phrases, overly verbose statements. And that's where you can tell. And now the problem with that is if you ask that officer on the stand what that means, they're not really going to have a good answer for you. So can we truly trust that report? And I would beg to say, I do not believe that they have the same safeguards that Chief Farah may have. And if they do, they're not following them all the time because their volume may be too high. And that's where we have a problem, is we can have guardrails in place, but when volume comes to it, and as Professor Adams was saying, we're not about efficiency, but when we try to be efficient, it causes these problems. So with that, I'll end it, but that's just my little spiel about AI and my one funny example.
Well, Avneet, that's very interesting that you mentioned that particular case, because one of the things that struck me in reading about some of the theoretical concerns about AI and police reporting is how theoretical most of them are. For example, Professor Andrew Ferguson, who's a criminologist, said human observations and memorialized facts can change the tenor, severity, and trajectory of the criminal case. But when I looked to see have any of these things actually happened in a particular case of an AI-generated police report, I couldn't find any. It was almost entirely theoretical. So I'm wondering, I would like to ask any of our three panelists, have you actually encountered a police report that was more problematic because it was generated by AI? Chief Farah, have you ever come across a police report that you thought had something skeptical in it or something that you couldn't believe that had been generated by AI?
That's not been our challenge when we're using draft one. I understand Mr. Chada's concern though, and I think it really makes the point of why we should use proven, tested, guardrailed, guideline, legally compliant devices when we're using this technology. If we don't, our cops will use ChatGPT. If we don't have a policy, if you don't have guardrails, individuals will do that. Just like kids are using ChatGPT to do their homework, people will go outside the lines. That's why our robust policy that says you shall use this in these circumstances and only in these circumstances, you must disclose that you're using this product. And then our constant monitoring of that process as well is so important. But to directly answer your question, no, I have not seen unicorns created flying over crime scenes or anything like that. I have seen witness statements that people have said, hey, this happened, that did not conform with the evidence of the facts. But that's an important part of police work in general. We're supposed to put those statements in as they were so that the public defender can evaluate them. And then our officer has a responsibility to say, yes, Joe said this happened, but the physical evidence showed something different. An example I'll give to you is I was involved in a traffic collision as a passenger officer when I worked for the LAPD. We had a witness that came out and said, I know what happened. The officers were going too fast. They went through the intersection, and that's how the collision occurred. I heard the sirens. We said, okay, sir, where were you standing when you saw the collision? He goes, I was in my office. And he pointed to a building that was completely concrete wall. There were no windows whatsoever. We said, so you didn't see the collision? No, but I heard it and I know what happens. They drive too fast all the time anyway. So that's what we've seen, which is what's happened. That was 35 years ago. And so those same kinds of issues can come up again today. And I understand the concerns about bias and about not getting it right and about taking shortcuts and those kinds of things. But if you don't think that those options are possibilities with human police officers, as well as AI, then you're missing most of the story. And then that's why I like the accountability of making sure that we've got multiple levels of check involved in any system, is to prevent ridiculous examples like Mr. Chada brought up. That's horrible. Nobody should take the stand and testify to that as a report. Nobody should sign off on idiomatic, Semitic, whatever it was, and saying this is what I'm telling you is the truth. That's ridiculous. That's close to perjury in my book. We can't do that.
We have, to answer your question, Tony, we've seen a couple examples nationwide where pretty silly examples of these reports are created. There was one last week in Heber, Utah, where what happened was there was a Disney movie on in the background that was being recorded during this interaction. The Disney movie got transcribed, and then in the resulting police report, it turned the officer into a frog. But I think this is a useful time. I want to align myself first with Deputy Chief Farah here and say, I've been warning for years. I lecture pretty routinely at the FBI National Academy, and that's where some of the nation's best police executives go for sort of their training to become the next chiefs in the country. And I've been warning them, number one, we got to get policy on board. Officers are very responsive to policy. It sometimes gets shortchanged. But policy is extremely important. Number two, I would much rather, even in an inefficient way, have officers in a constrained, guardrailed piece of software rather than just using open ChatGPT, right? Officers deal with too many sensitive documents and information to be transmitting over the open web. And most of they're not just Draft One. We shouldn't just focus on Draft One, right? There are other vendors out there. But there are certainly all the reputable vendors in this area are CJIS compliant. We call that CJIS, meaning they can transmit information, sensitive law enforcement information in a controlled and careful way. So I want to put that. And then like maybe just as a broader overview, how I think of these problems is sometimes I think we conflate technology issues with people issues. And it can be hard in this space because we're dealing with a technology being used by people. Some of these problems are technology-based, some of these problems are people-based, and we kind of need to solve both at the same time. For example, on the technology problem side of life, California is leading the nation in at least requiring disclosure. I think that's a good first step, but is it enough? And this may be a question for Mr. Chata. If we think about the AI-generated police report, there's three pieces of information. There is the transcript. There is the Draft One, the first initial, what is created by the software. And then there is a final report that is supposed to be somehow amended by the officer, right? I think, and what I sort of ask people to think about is why aren't all three of those pieces of information discoverable, so to speak, or turned over to the evidentiary record that both prosecutors and defense attorneys and juries and judges and everybody else can see. I would like to be mollified a bit when I see a report to know, well, how much of this was AI created and how much of it was officer created. Right now, no state in the nation requires that. Every police agency I talk to has no problem with this. Every public defender's office has no problem with this. Who has a problem with it? Vendors. They consider the set of custom instructions that goes alongside that transcript to be their their intellectual property. And maybe it is. I'm not an IP attorney. But when we're balancing the public interest and the public good here, something needs to give way a little bit. And then I'll just wrap up by saying, before I turn that over, I got to defend Professor Ferguson's good name. He was referred to as a criminologist. I'm a criminologist. He's not. And
You're right. He's a law professor.
he's a law professor. I don't want to, next time I'm buying him a drink, I don't want to have to buy him two. So, but he's a very, very, very smart guy.
Now, to your point, Ian, isn't that, and Mr. Chowder, you can back me up on this, isn't that what the new California law effective January 1st requires? Is the first draft, the transcription, which is already discoverable, and the final report. Isn't that compliant with California law now?
My understanding is that it does not require that first draft. It requires a disclosure that it's AI generated, and that it requires, of course, you're right, the transcription would be part of the evidentiary record, and the final report is part of the evidentiary record. I think what we're missing is the piece in between to tell us, how did we get from the transcript to the final report? Maybe it only contributed 1% of the information. I've watched officers use this. They delete the whole thing. It's not useful to them. Here's the thing. A 3-year officer, a 5-year officer, a 10-year officer, they have their report in their head implicitly before it's written. It's not hard for me to write a traffic stop report. It's not hard for me to write a theft report. I know I have almost a template in my head implicitly, if not explicitly. Like some officers will save those templates in my day to their desktop, and you just sort of pull it up and write that report. So for some officers, this is not as useful as others, but I think it's still an important bit of information to tie the transcript and the final report together by knowing what it was that was produced and what instructions went with it, right? Ultimately, you have a vendor sending a transcript plus some set of secret custom instructions out across to an LLM API and getting a return back. I think every bit of that is important information. At least if I'm facing charges, I want to know what was the magic formula that resulted in the document that is going to form the basis for that probable cause. I think that's important.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that is what we're dealing with right now. Is Chief Fair, we don't get that first report, and the new law just says they have to disclose it. Coincidentally, for CPDA, California Public Defender Association, which I am a member of, though I'm not speaking on their behalf, they did ask me to give a training where we had members from Axon Draft One come and present, and we had a Q&A with them. So we were able to ask them some questions, and in there we did learn that they do not want to share the first report. The first report is basically scrapped once a report is generated, and we would love to get access to it. But again, as Professor Adams said, it is the vendor, not necessarily the law enforcement agencies or anyone like that. But I will say, and Chief Farah did highlight this, and I will also align myself with Chief Farah, it is purpose-built tools is how I say it. Even defense attorneys are turning to ChatGPT. And yesterday I gave a training for our office in terms of how we as defense attorneys can use AI. And I cautioned against consumer-facing AI, right? And that's what Professor Adams is talking about, and even Chief Farah. When you don't give purpose-built tools to people, they will resort to consumer tools. And that's where we will see these problems arise more often than not. With purpose-built tools, at least we can set some guardrails into place. Even I'm a proponent of using AI, but it has to be for a purpose-built tool. And I've seen attorneys who use AI that is not purpose-built. It's a consumer-facing version. And then at that point, that's where we see them getting sanctions by the courts because they have hallucinations in their writing. So again, it's across all phases. I've seen this from the district attorney's office to criminal defense attorneys, public defenders, everyone. I'm not sitting here and saying I don't want to ride police officers just themselves, but it's everyone, right? And it's for the reasons that Professor Adams just said and Chief Farah. What Draft One does do, and I do advocate for, it has a thing called human in the loop AI, which requires a human to review the AI before they adopt its writing. And Draft one does acknowledge that they have some loopholes in it in terms of you can just copy paste and then redo it, but still, nonetheless, there is some integration of human in the loop in it. So they do try to incorporate that aspect.
We've actually
If
built in some prompts into the AI draft that require officers to go back and change it. Otherwise, it's going to be very evident that they did not. The other question I have from a legal point of view, let me ask this. Would an officer's notes, or if I sat down to write a report and I wrote a first draft and then I made changes, improvements, adjusted, would those notes be considered discoverable? Because my experience in policing is that they are not. And I think that's one of the legal issues that we have to look at. Is this comparable to an officer's first draft? Ultimately, I think we all agree that an officer has to sign his name at the bottom of the report and take ownership and accountability for every word on the page, every fact cited, everything. And I've testified before. One of the first questions very sharp attorneys have asked me is, did you make any mistakes in this report? And I usually hang my head and go, yeah, I misspelled this street. I got this context wrong. I wrote that we're on Telfair Avenue. We're on a different street, whatever those minor mistakes are. And I think that honesty and that accountability adds to credibility. But the bottom line, though, it becomes the officer and the agency behind that officer that has to be accountable for every word on the page.
I will respectfully disagree in this regard. I've had judges order the notes turned over. When we've had them turned over, though, is when the officer is in court and they're reading from the notes, they're referencing their notes. Mm-hmm. And at that point, we can say, Your Honor, the DA has access to these notes. The law enforcement is considered an arm of the district attorney's office at that point. So we should get those notes. And we've had them turned over there. But that being said, when we're trying to account for how much AI is used, I think that's where we have a slight, maybe not the edits, but at least let's start with the first draft or whatever the AI did, right? And then we can determine whatever edits were made by the officer just by reviewing the two copies.
And I would add, I'm not sure about the metaphor about like investigative notes versus the set of special custom instructions that are and first draft that comes back. And the reason is of course the notes are created by the officer themselves as part of work product to create it. This is something else and admittedly new, right? Courts are going to have to sort through some of these issues. And then there's this second issue that I bring up that I'm interested definitely in both of your. I don't have a good answer to this problem, but there's a news story out there that I use in my lectures to prompt police executives to think about, and it occurred in Oklahoma City, and it's a canine sergeant. I was a canine guy, so he's a man after my own heart. He's clearly a technologist, and they're quoting him in kind of a puff piece. I have a sense that it was earned media, but he's going on about how much he loves Draft One, and he says the following. He says, "It's so accurate. It's more accurate than I could have been in my life." And then he relates a story, and this is where it becomes troubling to me, Chief. He says he's responding to an incident, and his partner, or another officer, says something about the suspects being in a red car. The incident proceeds, arrests get made. And this is what this sergeant says. He says, "I didn't even remember that the officer had told me that the suspects were in a red car. How brilliant is this that it caught it and put it into my report?" I think that we're on the border of something weird there, right? It's an officer's report is supposed to be mostly their perceptions of what their investigations and the facts that they discovered. Is it true then, if he writes in that report that he heard another officer say this? No, that's clearly not true. So how should we be training officers to document sort of technology-assisted memory versus their own? And then, as you know, I might write a report today. I might not be testifying that until 2028. And I have real concerns about, if I am generating an 80% AI generated report and I write 20% of it, I don't have any scientific evidence to back this up yet. This is sort of ongoing stuff, but I'm very interested in, like, am I more likely to remember what I personally wrote? Possibly, and we should be thinking about that a little bit as well.
I would like to jump in with a question for Professor Adams. You have largely been focusing on efficiency and productivity in your research so far, but you've talked quite a bit about the actual substance of the reports and problems that might be generated through AI with substance. What kind of follow-up research would you like to do, or do you think needs to be done?
Yeah, what we're doing right now is taking on the quality question. The chief mentioned this that it's his agency's experience that the quote quality has gone up. So the first step of that research is to say, well, what do we mean by quality, right? Um, uh, I can go back 100 years in modern policing and find sergeants complaining about the quality of police reports. And yet I've testified a lot and I've never seen an officer get jammed up on the stand because of a misspelled word, a misplaced preposition, or bad grammar or punctuation. That's not what causes the problems. The problems are something to do more with accuracy and completeness, and maybe fit. And so when we say that these police reports read better, I agree, like from an English 101 comp sort of way. They read like ChatGPT because that is what is happening on the back end, just for the audience. They're hitting the 4.0 mini model, if you're familiar with that. That's the API they're hitting. So sort of like 2, 3 generations ago model. And they're doing that for cost reasons, right? It's a lot cheaper to hit that API. But I want to know something else. I want to know if we compare, all else held equal, if in an experiment we're having sergeants and other what I consider report experts read, a bunch of reports and do that over many, many respondents, do we actually detect something about what we want out of the police report? Not necessarily just the grammar piece. The grammar piece has been demonstrated. It gets better. I will just say that that study was done by Axon itself, so like obviously some potential conflicts of interest in that study. But I think there's a long way to go to demonstrate to me or others that the inherent policeness of that report has gotten better, let alone for Mr. Chata's audience or the people in who are screening these reports at the district attorney's office for charges. Do they think the reports got better? Can they detect whether AI was involved or not? These are all questions that I think still need to be answered.
What are your muted?
Thank you all very much. We have a limited amount of time for audience questions, but we'd like to get a few in. Jessica, do you want to read those or do you want me to?
Yeah, I can go ahead and read them. I think
Yeah, you go ahead.
let me do the first one because it's my question, but also directly relevant to Professor Adams' comment just now about quality. So in AI, there's a lot of benchmarking that's going on to ensure quality in different areas. I'm curious if there are any related to your issue about quality. Are there currently any AI benchmarks established for purpose-built AI tools for policing?
No, if you're interested in the study I was just talking about, there what the benchmarks they're using are sort of like operationalized as measures that we use in other studies, right? Like around reading ease and grade level, that sort of thing. But there's no, to my knowledge, been no solid effort at developing a police-specific benchmark. No.
Great, thanks. Another question related to that. At the beginning, Darren Gray, who great to see you here, Darren. Thank you for joining. What data sets are the AIs that write reports trained on?
Professor Adams hit it on that one, right? The data sets, we need to take a step back for when we talk about the AI. What actually AI is the vendors, in this case, Axon, is contracting with OpenAI and then using a specific API. So whatever that model that they're contracting with OpenAI, it's whatever that is trained on. And then there's a set of instructions that the vendor creates to tell the AI how to think. But that's basically, so whatever was trained on 4.0 mini, which I believe was up to 2023, some random month in 2023.
24, I believe, but yeah.
Okay, 24. And that's to the extent that it was trained on. So that's kind of the data sets. There's no
There are vendors making efforts, from what I understand. I have no specific special information here. You can imagine, though, those of you familiar with the difficulties in training these models, finding a data source on this is quite difficult. I mean, even large agencies are going to have a limited amount of these reports. And so, and the other sort of wrinkle here is there is no standardized police report in the United States, right? Burks is using a different version than I was using, than Mr. Chata's seen in his day-to-day work in LA. So, and there's 18,000 agencies in the United States. And so, and the average agency has between 12 and 15 officers. So you can imagine the sort of variability that these vendors are confronting. And so most of them have stayed away from sort of boutique report writing. There's some that say they make that effort. I haven't evaluated them, so I can't speak to their ability to accomplish that goal. But it is a very challenging technical hurdle here.
Great. Thank you. And I think we have a recent comment from the audience regarding this discussion in particular. Is there any work that you're aware of training models on police reports and cleaner data sets in general, or, adding these additional sets of instructions or additional layer like a RAG or something to make the police reports more specific for the purpose?
Yeah, I hope I answered that. I understand there's efforts. They're quite challenging in terms of just generating the training set that you would want to work from there. For those of you who are interested, there's nothing super magical about what's going on here when we talk about an instruction set or a template. In fact, when I go, I have this is open source on the web. You can go find Ian Adams' AI police report writing. And it's a white paper I developed years ago, right? Probably January 2023, immediately after, because when ChatGPT launches in November 2022, I immediately see officers start to use ChatGPT to write reports. Of course they are. They're creative people. We train them to be creative problem solvers, and they're under a lot of time pressure, mounting call demand, fewer labor resources, fewer officers during that period. And so, of course, like they reach out for this technological fix. And my alarm bells went off, and I started talking. That's kind of how I got my start here. And what I did in that paper is I showed, here's a template. I just used one of my old police templates that I used to write reports on. I said, here's a template. Let me send it to ChatGPT and say, please write a police report. And I just, filled in a couple details, and it would create a legitimate looking police report that was totally false. And I said, this is what your officers are doing. We need to get ahead of this. We need to get ahead of the policy curve and the technology curve, and we need to start talking about it now. Unfortunately, that message has not reached everywhere I would like it to, but we can still see that things are getting better in the what did you call it, Mr. Chatha? The consumer, or like there's consumer facing ChatGPT and there's vendor based. I'm definitely a fan of the vendor based because at least we can build in some controls, some policy, and that ultra that the security, which is ultra important here.
Yeah, and just to go along with what Professor Adams is saying, so I kind of on the defense side noticed attorneys using ChatGPT, and so I jumped in on my personal life and created a product for defense attorneys. And in doing so, I learned so much about AI, and I would really encourage anyone to just start like digging and figuring out, looking at the docs about how to create AI. You learn so much information. What you learn with ChatGPT is they give you the API, so that's the connection, right, to the model, and then you feed it instructions, which is your prompt. And then so we don't know the prompts that are being built on this and whatnot, and that makes the magic happen. That's what Professor Adams is saying. So you learn so much about that's going on, and that's essentially what these vendors are doing. They're just changing their prompt. The data sets are the same. It's the same data set that my product purpose-built tool is built on.
Well, and it says something. I mean, that explains. I'm glad you explained that. That explains why they are protective of what they see as their intellectual property, right? Because ultimately, they're sort of using the same backends. They're either using Claude or that's Anthropic's model. They might be using Gemini. They might be using OpenAI's ChatGPT. They're using some sort of publicly sourced API. And so that isn't going to be distinguishable between vendors. So what is something about like their user interface? And Axon has a huge head start there because they're going to have the baked in body worn camera market. They are the largest provider of that. For those who are just catching up to the police technology stuff, when we say Axon, that is a large technology provider in policing. They used to be known as a name you might actually know, which is Taser. So they used to be known as Taser Inc. They changed their name to Axon, and they view themselves and are viewed as an AI and technology policing company. They have drones, they have body cameras, they've been on a buying spree lately. They've been purchasing dispatching technologies. They've been doing a lot. Report writing is just one little bit of that, but it's part of this larger suite. I saw one question that I wanted to address, which is to the cost. I will let the chief speak to his agency, but I will tell you it is extremely challenging to get this number. If you want to just know how much does Draft One cost, and that's because Axon tends to bundle their products, and that masks the cost. But I will tell you this: I was able to discover this in the agency that I did our study in. Immediately after the study ended, which was a null, and so the agency ended up not adopting this contract. To be clear, the cost. This is an agency with about a $32 million budget a year. Like all agencies, though, about 96% of their costs are soaked up by labor, right? That's just what it costs to do officers. So they have around like a $2.5 million usable budget post labor. The Draft One contract that was put in front of them was equated to 11% of that budget annually, and the total Axon suite of services that they were proposing, which would have included body cameras, evidence.com, which is their sort of portal and storage system, plus Draft One, equated to 24% of their annual budget. So that is one of my huge concerns out here is like, if it's being sold as an efficiency gainer on the public dollar, and it's an agency that it's a company that's asking for approximately a quarter of the public monies that are going into this agency that are available. Like, I think we need to have a conversation about what we're trying to accomplish. I think that's for those of us interested in the public budget. I think that if it's setting out to save time, then we need to see that time saved.
I'll tell you asked me for the number, and Dr. Adams is absolutely right. Because of the way Axon packages their products, it's virtually impossible to pull out the Draft One from all of the services they provide, and including some incredible additions this year. The capability of the body camera to translate over 50 languages in real time from our officers, and then to translate that language back to the citizen or the resident in the field in their language. So, in other words, someone can say something in Mandarin to me, the body camera will translate that back to me.
So cool.
I will then talk and make a command or answer a question or ask a question. It will deliver that back in Mandarin, 50 different languages with that. And then it'll transcribe all that into English for me as well for my police report. So between that, tasers, body-worn camera integrated holsters to make sure the body camera comes on if the weapon's pulled out of the holster, either a taser or a firearm. Evidence.com, which is the storage portal and access portal for citizens to submit evidence. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. So you're right, very difficult to pull out the actual number for Draft One. And when it comes to efficiency, it's going to be very difficult to determine, are we getting our bang for the buck just for this one small piece? But as we discussed before we came on live on the web camera, body-worn camera is a very important part of our industry. That's not going to change. That's here forever. And our officers don't want to go on the field now without one, because it provides the true record of what happened out there, and in many cases protects the officer and assists the officer in writing a very accurate police report. So when it comes to efficiency, I think that's a very small measure we have to look at overall. You have to add in the fiscal responsibility to liability, and can we settle out lawsuits? And Mr. Chattah mentioned earlier too, as far as efficiency in settling out criminal cases and not spending hours and hours in court, because we have these tools that allow us to move these cases forward very quickly. So it's a very complex question, and you're right, I do not have a simple answer for you.
Jessica, another question? I think we have time for one more.
Great. Why don't we address one more question about policy? Let's go back to policy because we did address it early on, and maybe some folks who joined later didn't catch the whole discussion, but there was one question related to policy requirements around reporting and transparency of use of AI. And the audience question is, shouldn't explainable AI be made a requirement or a component of any policies requiring transparency?
Sure, but I mean, I don't know that I believe much about the explainability literature, so I think we might like be asking too much of policing and vendors at that stage, right? But I think we can get closer if you adopt my view that we should, as part of the entirety of the package that we deliver, We should get the transcript, the special set of custom instructions, the first return, and then the final report. We already get 2 of those 4. It's just those middle 2 that are vendor controlled. So the pressure, if you're interested in that policy question, the pressure isn't really on police agencies, it's on vendors and on regulatory bodies to eventually sort of, say, look, we can respect intellectual property rights without giving away the public good. And that ultimately is the tension as I see it. And I don't mean to put my thumb on the scale either way. I understand intellectual property rights are important. But we're going to have that public debate and sort of figure out where the answer lies.
Thank you very much. Jessica?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, everyone. And thank you, Tony, first of all, for putting this entire panel together. It was really robust. And thank you to all our panelists for joining us and for taking the time to share all your knowledge and wisdom about this emerging technology with us. To wrap it up, I just wanted to thank everyone for joining, but also give a plug for Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, the nonprofit who has sponsored our webinar today. Oops, sorry about that. So thank you everyone for joining today. We do have regular events and webinars like this throughout the year, and we encourage you to sign up for our newsletter here. ESAL.us is our website, and you can subscribe to our newsletter on our website or through this QR code. We also have volunteer opportunities, and we have a variety of roles that you can take if you're interested in joining us and interested in policy issues like AI or other local issues that concern your community. And we also have this online community.esal.us that we encourage you to join.
And I would just like to add one thing, and that is that a recording of this panel discussion will very soon be available on the ESAL website, and very shortly after that, we will have a write-up of it as well.
That's right. So we encourage you to sign up for a newsletter if you want to keep up to date on when those are made available. And with that, I just want to thank Tony, Burke, Ian, and Avneet for spending the time today to educate us about this important issue of AI and policing.
Thank you for
Thanks. It
having
was
us.
great to join you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you all, and good night.
Appreciate the conversation. Good night.